Hello, my education classmates. My name is Matthew Barzal, and today, or tonight, depending upon when you are viewing this, I will be talking to you about speech-sound disorders. So, to hook you all in to this lesson of speech-sound disorders, I have planned a cool activity that would allow us to all experience the effects of a speech-sound disorder. Now, as we will learn very shortly, a speech-sound disorder essentially makes it so it's very hard for you to communicate. So, as we can see with our little friend here in the picture, he probably wouldn't be able to talk too well since his mouth is full of French fries. So, we will be doing a similar thing, just to see how hard it could be. So if you have any food around you, just start slowly putting it in your mouth, and see if it eventually gets harder to talk. On me right now, I'm putting some bread in my mouth, so it's getting a little difficult. But you can imagine, if this is what you have to deal with every single day, eventually it'll get kind of frustrating. Because you don't know how to talk anymore. So, what are speech-sound disorders, or SSDs? Well, it's actually an umbrella term referring to a category of disorders. All these disorders cause problems with perception, motor production, and/or your phonological representation of speech sounds and segments. Or in more simple terms, it impacts your speech intelligibility in one way or another. Now, there are four main types of speech sound disorders. The first here is a motor-based disorder. This could be something like verbal apraxia, where the brain is not actually able to activate the motor cortex in the correct way to produce certain sounds. Another type is structurally based disorders or conditions, and this could be something like a cleft palate, where you have an actual physical obstacle that's preventing you from producing certain sounds. The third type of disorder is a syndrome or condition-related disorder, and this is usually where you have a previously known condition, such as Down syndrome, that may be preventing you from correctly pronouncing sounds. And the last is a sensory-based condition. This could be something like a hearing impairment or deafness, where just because of the deafness, you are not able to produce any sounds. SSDs are classified by IDEA as speech and language impairments. IDEA defines speech and language impairments as a communication disorder such as stuttering, impaired articulation, a language impairment, or a voice impairment that adversely affects a child's educational performance. If you wonder how a speech-sound disorder can adversely affect a child's educational performance, you must remember that these children with SSDs can understand language perfectly fine. They hit a roadblock when they need to communicate their own language. So, not being able to communicate effectively can create a very frustrating classroom environment for many children. It is important to note that just if a child is showing speech production errors, it does not necessarily mean that they have a disorder. In children with disorders, one could consistently observe the occurrence of speech errors, such as additions or deletions. If a child does have a disorder, the consistency at which they make these errors should be often enough that it is very difficult to understand what they are saying. The most effective way to identify a child with a speech-sound disorder is simply by communicating with them and observing them in their classroom environment. If you notice that the child is falling behind their peers linguistically, then there is a chance that that child has a speech-sound disorder. In general, while communicating, if the child is not understood by you or by their classmates, and you can understand their classmates, there is a high chance that they have a speech-sound disorder, as a speech-sound disorder makes it so that they are not easily understood. If a child shows persistent language production errors, then it would not be uncommon for family members, such as a child's parents, to bring their concerns to the school staff. Whenever an SSD is suspected, the child is put through thorough screenings of all possible causes of SSDs. This will analyze the possibility of the SSD being one of the 4 different categories of disorders previously mentioned. If the screenings show positive results for a speech-sound disorder, and the child has not already been referred to a speech-language pathologist, or SLP, then at this time, they would be. With the SLP, the child will go through more comprehensive assessments that get more and more specific to the child's individual possible speech disorder. Having completed the comprehensive assessment with the SLP, the student may end up with a diagnosis of a disorder. If not, the SLP will have recommendations for a response to intervention or services similar to that. If nothing else, then the pathologist will refer the child to other professionals who can further assist. Aside from pre-existing conditions that would say that a child will have trouble communicating, the causes are often unknown, quite unfortunately. However, there are some risk factors to take note of. Oftentimes, males will be more vulnerable to speech-sound disorders. Any prenatal or perinatal problems could also contribute to speech-sound disorders. A history of ear, nose, or throat problems often leads to a higher chance of speech-sound disorders. Also, genetics can play a role. According to the National Institute of Deafness and Other Communication Disorders, 8 to 9% of children not yet in school grade have an SSD of unknown cause. However, according to REN, by age 8, only 3.6% of children still struggle with that SSD. So, that shows that a lot of the therapy done by SLPs usually is very beneficial. Looking at the characteristics of children with SSDs, they are very rarely good communicators, as that is inherent in the disorder. In their social and emotional lifestyle, they are often very vulnerable to bullying, and due to their lack of being able to communicate, will often not be able to develop long-term friendships. This also damages them psychologically, as being the victim of a bully and not having any friends to turn to can often leave you kind of distressed in your brain. Psychologically, the student may be struggling, since it could very well be getting the blunt end of bullying, and not having many friends to help them cope with that could also be a struggle. Academically, we often see children with SSDs fall behind in reading and writing, and speaking. Due to the academic struggle brought on by an SSD, some students may struggle when trying to find a job out of high school. However, this is often not the case because most students overcome their SSD by the time they are in high school. Still, some students have a persistent SSD that they may have to live with for their entire life. There are very many strategies a teacher can use to assist a child with an SSD. One of those would be to show the child the correct pronunciation for words they often mispronounce. An example of that would be if a child says, "My daddy drives a really cool ruck," for the teacher to restate that word by saying something like, "Oh really, Bobby? What type of truck does your dad drive?" If anyone would like additional strategies for helping the child with an SSD in the classroom, I will link below in the description a great document that you should all check out. Another great way to help the children with SSDs is early intervention. This is so important for the children. Statistics have shown time after time that the earlier a child receives intervention with their speech disorder, the better off they will be later on. As for myself, I, like my grandfather, had verbal apraxia from birth. However, my parents caught it before I was even in grade school, so we were able to get very early intervention for myself, and now I can speak all right. Another way the teacher may assist is by trying to help set up the IEP if necessary. A lot of times this won't be something that the teacher needs to do, as the SLP will be able to take care of all of that. However, if additional observations and information is needed, the teacher may be there to assist. One of the most important ways that the teacher can help the student is by creating a healthy class environment for that student with the speech-sound disorder. Having a class that is educated on the impacts of bullying and that is aware that bullying is not a cool thing will be very helpful for the student. Always be patient. The student may be trying to communicate with the teacher, but it's just not coming out very quickly. So having a teacher that's willing to sit there and wait and let the student take their time pronouncing things is one of the best things that the student could have. Here I have some resources for families that may be interested in learning more about speech-sound disorders. Using all of these links, you can learn more about them and how to spot them, and learn how to provide services to help students who are struggling with them. Here I have for you all a brief assessment. If you would like to, you can pause the video and answer the questions, and then the answers are in the bottom right. And here is everyone's favorite slide, my references. Thank you all for viewing my presentation on speech sound disorders, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.